Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. In today's Israel Keys video, I'll be covering some of Israel's early years. These years concern the Keys family and their attendance to a white supremacist church known as the Ark. I hope you enjoy. It was in Colville, Washington, that Keys' parents, Jeff and Heidi, decided it'd be a good idea to join Our Place Fellowship, more commonly known as the Ark. The Ark was situated in Stevens County, very near to the Canadian border. It was listed as a hate group. The group preached a white is superior message and followed Christian identity theology, which is a racial interpretation of Christianity. A quick rundown of Christian identity theology. This belief puts forth the idea that the Bible is actually the story of Anglo-Saxon/Aryan people. The Jews are not the descendants of people from the Bible. They are actually descendants of Satan. You can probably see where the hate group labelling comes from. The group ticked the boxes for being racist and anti-Semitic. Israel was in his early teenage years at this time. It was the early 1990s, and the experience of attending the group, which was basically a cult, most likely impacted him and his future activities. The family lived in a small shack up a mountain outside of Colville. With 10 kids living in such a cramped environment, life must have been difficult. The Keys children were all homeschooled and survived by hunting and growing their own food. Keys' interest in survivalist books and being outdoors must have been ingrained within him from a young age. There was no electricity, and the family were cut off from the rest of society. Just a mile from the Keys' residence lived another family, the Kehoe family. The family mirrored the Keys family in that it was large, with 8 children. Their children were also homeschooled and visited the Ark. Chevy and Shane Kehoe were close to Israel Keys' own age. They taught him more about guns, which he was already fascinated by, and how to obtain, shoot, conceal and sell them. Keys was by all accounts a follower. He seemed easily influenced by other people and their actions. His behaviour around this time seems to coincide with his future behaviour patterns. He would admit to burglarising houses around this time. Sometimes he did this with companions. Chevy and Shane likely participated and or showed Israel how to actually commit them. As with many youngsters who engage in crimes early on, escalation always seems to occur. As Israel grew older, he began to harm animals and soon, other people. The Kehoe family, Chevy and Shane in particular, also escalated their crimes. They engaged in more extremist behaviour as the years progressed, with Chevy planning to overthrow the US government. The Ark was militia-like, and Chevy had formed the Aryan People's Republic militia. It's a common theme that cut-off groups loathe the federal government, and this certainly applies to the Kehoe and Keys families. In 1996, Chevy and an accomplice, I believe it was his father, broke into a family's home in Arkansas. They had travelled there from Washington. They had information that they were in possession of a lot of guns. The owner, who they'd robbed before, was a gun dealer. They waited for the family to arrive home and then tortured them for information about where they could find guns, ammunition and money. On collecting $50,000 worth of all three, they ended up murdering the family via asphyxiation. One was only 8 years old. They then drove them to a lake where they submerged them with large rocks. They then drove back to Washington State and ended up at a motel. Eventually they sold some of the guns they had stolen. They ended up getting into a police shootout the following year, in 1997, and eventually ended up being connected to the Arkansas family murder via gun serial numbers. Shane would direct police to his brother's whereabouts and would later allege that Chevy had knowledge of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing plot. This is all unconfirmed, and the FBI apparently has found no evidence of this. The Ark's attendees ultimately had a significant impact on Keyes and his actions later on down the line. The description of the Arkansas family murder is eerily similar to methods employed by Keyes: home invasion burglaries, having the objective of stealing guns from homes, selling stolen guns, submerging victims in lakes. He used milk bottles filled with concrete rather than rocks, travelling into different states to commit crimes, murdering both men and women, and victimising children, at least he confessed to earlier on. Israel could have easily ended up like the brothers, but his worldview soon changed, to an extent. At around age 15 or 16, he questioned his mother's way of living. He wasn't convinced that there was any form of higher power, and his parents were furious to say the least. He went the opposite route of the Ark's teachings, and didn't further become indoctrinated into Christian identity theology like the Kehoe brothers, but had surely made an impact on his developing worldview. He later began dating women from other ethnicities and stood up for Muslims online. Plus, he was secretly homosexual, something that wouldn't have been accepted in the Ark, I would imagine. Still, an inner conflict appeared to remain within Keyes. He told Tammy that he was a bad person, and Tammy recalls him having mentioned that he knew the Kehoes, having seen the Kehoe brothers' story on TV. She pushed the conversation, but he didn't elaborate. Keyes relied on alcohol to seemingly cope with the person that he truly was. This is speculation on my part. He cried at his sister's wedding, saying, "You don't know what I've done." The vast majority of his family, by that point, held Christian values and likely had little to be ashamed of. Israel was the exact opposite. His siblings and mother in particular would never be able to accept his true self. In their eyes, if they ever found out who he truly was, he was surely going to hell. Overall, the Ark's environment and influences from other attendees during his teenage years surely resulted in his crimes escalating. Warped worldview combined with his own lack of humanity from a young age seemed to result in a dangerous mixing of poisons which would impact innocent lives in the future. Having been ostracised from his family due to his beliefs, his engagement in criminal activity followed. His two lives, as he called it. When he was younger, he was avoided by other children due to the cruel behaviour towards animals that he'd exhibited. My belief is that the same banishing treatment led to him being isolated and committing more solo crimes, which only escalated over time. Nobody was around to tell him what was right and what was wrong. He could hide his evil acts from the outside world and enjoyed committing them, but deep down he knew that he was an evil person. The name Israel means to struggle or to wrestle with God. You can't hide from who you truly are after all, and Israel was definitely hiding his true self from his family. This has been a short video on Israel Keyes and his connection to the Ark. As always, thanks for watching.